The unexpected miracle. Lucas had never been the type to believe in miracles. He had grown up on the farm, surrounded by the hard truths of life, the sweat, the toil, and the pain that often accompanied hard work. His father had instilled in him the idea that life was a series of challenges to overcome, not mysteries to be solved. Lucas had carried this philosophy into adulthood, shrugging off the idea of fate or destiny as nothing more than naive thinking. But that morning, on the edge of his quiet, empty farm, he was about to witness something that would make him question everything he had ever believed. It had been 5 years since his wife, Olivia, passed away from cancer. 5 years of silence. 5 years of loneliness. The farm, which had once been full of life and joy, now felt like an empty shell. Lucas had retreated into his work, pouring himself into the farm's upkeep, as if somehow staying busy would fill the aching void left in his heart. But no matter how many crops he harvested or animals he tended to, the emptiness never seemed to go away. He hadn't spoken much to anyone in years, and he certainly hadn't made any effort to engage with the local community. In his mind, everyone had moved on, and he was simply stuck in the past. But that morning was different. Lucas had gone through his usual routine. He woke up early, the smell of coffee from the kitchen already wafting through the house, courtesy of Grace, the woman who came by daily to clean the house and cook his meals. Grace was a quiet woman, respectful of his space and mindful of his grief. She didn't ask questions or try to fill the silence. Lucas appreciated that. As he sat down at the table, he absent-mindedly glanced toward the corner where his dog, Luna, usually slept. The bed was empty. "Grace, have you seen Luna?" Lucas asked, his voice low and rough. He hadn't realized how unusual it was for Luna not to be at his feet until the question slipped from his mouth. Grace looked up from her task, her brow furrowing in thought. "No, patron, I thought she was with you. Is she not in the yard?" Lucas shook his head. Something didn't feel right. Luna, his loyal companion for years, had always been there, waiting for him to wake, ready to greet him with her wagging tail. But today, she was nowhere to be found. A wave of unease washed over him. Maybe she had gone off to find a quiet place for herself. She had been acting a little strange recently, more reclusive than usual, and Lucas assumed it had to do with the upcoming litter of puppies she was due to have. Still, something in the pit of his stomach told him that he needed to find her. He finished his coffee quickly, stood up from the table, and walked out the back door. His boots made a familiar thud against the dirt path as he called her name, but Luna didn't appear. He searched the yard, checked the barn, and even called for her by the orchard where she liked to rest in the shade. But there was no sign of her. The tension in his chest tightened as he approached the barn. He knew she often sought seclusion when she was about to give birth, but the thought that she had gone into labor alone in some dark corner of the barn made his heart race. He quickened his steps, the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel echoing in the stillness. When he reached the barn door, he noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. Dark, irregular stains dotted the ground. The blood was fresh. It led straight to the barn entrance. His heart skipped a beat. "Luna," he whispered hoarsely, his voice barely carrying in the thick, cool air. His instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, he rushed inside. The barn was dim, the only light coming from the cracks in the wooden walls where sunlight barely filtered through. Luna was there, lying on a bed of straw. But as Lucas's eyes adjusted to the gloom, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. Among the tiny, wriggling puppies that were nursing from Luna, something else caught his attention. A tiny human baby, lying next to the puppies, its fragile body moving slowly as it breathed. For a moment, Lucas stood frozen. He blinked, unsure if his eyes were deceiving him. It couldn't be. There, beside the puppies, was a human baby, a small, naked infant that seemed no different from any newborn human. Its skin was soft, its limbs curled up as it nursed from Luna. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How could this be? How could Luna, his dog, have given birth to a human baby. He took a tentative step forward, his heart pounding so hard in his chest it seemed to echo through the barn. He knelt beside the baby, his hand shaking as he reached out to touch its tiny, delicate form. It felt real, warm, and alive, just like any newborn. But the question that tormented him was, how? Lucas's mind spun, a whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and panic. He looked around frantically, as if the answer would materialize in the dusty air of the barn. Was this some sort of cruel joke? A sick trick of nature? Or perhaps an illusion? Luna, meanwhile, lay calmly beside the infant, her eyes gentle and full of tenderness, as if she had been born to care for this child. Lucas's heart twisted as he realized she was nurturing the baby just as she would her own puppies, without hesitation, without fear. His voice barely above a whisper, Lucas spoke to the silent barn, the confusion evident in every word. This can't be real. This can't be happening. He slowly stood, his mind racing. The impossible had happened. There was no logical explanation for this. And yet, here it was, a living, breathing baby lying next to his dog's newborn pups. Just as Lucas tried to process the unbelievable sight before him, a small movement behind a pile of hay caught his attention. His instincts sharpened. He grabbed the shotgun resting against the wall of the barn, lifting it cautiously. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice firm, though his heart was racing. The barn fell silent, save for the soft sounds of Luna's breathing and the whimpers of her puppies. Lucas took a cautious step toward the shadowy corner where the movement had occurred. And then he heard it, a muffled sob, followed by a figure emerging from behind the hay. It was a woman, young and pale, with disheveled hair and a look of pure fear in her eyes. She raised her hands, trembling as if in surrender. "Please," she whispered, her voice weak. "I didn't know what else to do." Lucas froze, his mind trying to catch up with the flood of emotions and questions. Who was she? What was she doing here? How had she given birth to this child? What was going on? Stay tuned to discover what happens next in this shocking tale of unexpected miracles, hidden truths, and a story that will change everything Lucas ever believed. The woman behind the miracle. Lucas's hand remained gripped tightly around the shotgun, his eyes locked onto the woman standing in the shadows. The confusion in his mind only deepened as the seconds stretched into eternity. The soft sobs of the woman filled the silence of the barn, her body trembling as she took a tentative step forward. The tiny human baby, still nestled in the straw next to Luna, continued to nurse from the dog without any signs of distress, as though it was the most natural thing in the world. Lucas's heart pounded as he slowly lowered the shotgun, still trying to wrap his mind around the absurdity of the situation. The woman's face was pale, her features soft and angelic, though strained with fear. She wore simple, unkempt clothing, stained with blood, evidence of the intense ordeal she had just undergone. Her eyes met Lucas's, full of helplessness and vulnerability, yet there was something else too. A deep sense of determination, perhaps, or desperation. She wasn't here by choice, that much was clear. "I didn't mean to scare anyone," the woman said softly, her voice trembling. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, still trying to steady her breath. "I had nowhere else to go." Lucas's heart clenched. His instinct was to ask a million questions. What are you doing here? Who are you? How did this happen? But none of the words seemed to come out. Instead, he stood frozen in place, his mind still struggling to process the image before him. A woman who appeared out of nowhere, with a newborn human baby born in the barn alongside puppies. It was beyond anything he could fathom, a surreal reality that made his legs feel unsteady beneath him. His eyes flickered briefly toward the baby, still lying next to Luna, who had continued to care for the child with the same protectiveness she showed her own pups. Despite the impossibility of it all, the baby seemed at peace. "It's real," Lucas thought to himself, his mind racing. "It's alive." But how? He turned his gaze back to the woman, who now stood several feet away from him, her hands still raised in surrender. She seemed genuinely afraid of him, yet also ashamed, as if she were apologizing for something beyond her control. "Who are you?" Lucas asked, his voice steady, but tinged with disbelief. "What is going on here? How did this happen?" The woman hesitated, glancing down at the ground before meeting Lucas's eyes again. Her gaze softened with a mixture of sorrow and vulnerability. "My name is Clara," she said quietly. "And I don't know how to explain this, but I gave birth to that baby." Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, as if the words were too heavy for her to say aloud. "But I didn't just give birth to him. I didn't choose this. I don't even understand it myself." Lucas felt his heart race, his mind spinning even faster. He took a cautious step forward, keeping his distance from Clara, his eyes flicking to the baby and then back to her. "Are you saying you gave birth here? In my barn?" he asked, still unable to comprehend what she was saying. "But you're human. And my dog, Luna, she can't." "I know," Clara interrupted, her voice shaking. "I know this sounds impossible, but I swear to you, I didn't have any part in this. I was running, trying to escape. I had no idea where to go, so I came here. And then I gave birth. But it wasn't just to the puppies. I don't even know how it happened, but somehow, the baby was born too." Lucas's mind felt like it was being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. His chest tightened as he tried to make sense of the words that Clara had spoken. Luna, his dog, had been pregnant. Lucas had known that. But for her to give birth to a human child as well. The implications were terrifying and perplexing. What kind of unnatural force had caused this? Clara, noticing Lucas's intense stare, lowered her eyes and took a step back, as if afraid of what might happen next. She glanced at the baby in the straw and then back at Lucas. "I know you must have a million questions," she said quietly. "But the truth is, I don't have the answers. All I know is that I was running from something, and I ended up here." Lucas frowned. Running from what? Clara hesitated for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was strained, as though the words had been locked away for far too long. "I was part of something I didn't fully understand. There were experiments, and I was chosen. But when I realized what was happening, when I saw what they had done to me, I ran. They were trying to control me, trying to use me as some sort of, I don't know, a test subject. I didn't know what to do, so I ran and kept running until I came here, to the only place I felt safe." Lucas's heart raced as he listened to Clara's story. He had heard of strange, secretive organizations in the past, whispers of experiments and research that stretched the boundaries of human understanding. But he had never imagined that something so horrifying could be happening so close to him. His first instinct was to question her, to demand the truth. But something in her eyes, something raw and genuine, told him she wasn't lying. Whatever had happened to her, it was something far beyond her control. Clara continued, her voice now quiet but determined. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for the baby. But Luna, she took care of me. She helped me through it. Clara paused, her face softening as she glanced at the dog. She was the only one who understood. And then, when I woke up after giving birth, I found myself here, with Luna and the baby. I didn't know what else to do. I don't even know if I'm safe here." Lucas stood silently, his mind still struggling to grasp the weight of the situation. This was not the type of life he had imagined when he decided to isolate himself on the farm. And yet, as he stood there, looking at Clara's tear-streaked face and the baby resting peacefully beside the puppies, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of responsibility. He couldn't abandon them. Not now. "Clara, you're safe here," Lucas said quietly, his voice steady. "You're not alone. We'll figure this out. But for now, you need to rest. Both of you do." He turned toward the straw-filled corner of the barn where Luna and the babies lay, the weight of what had happened pressing down on him like an insurmountable burden. How could this have happened? He wondered, but there was no answer, only silence, and the warmth of a miracle he hadn't asked for, but now couldn't ignore. Lucas helped Clara to her feet, offering her his arm. As they stood together, the strange connection between them growing, they both looked down at the baby, whose tiny chest rose and fell with each fragile breath. The baby, just like the puppies, was a symbol of life. A new beginning, one that defied the odds. The barn, once a quiet place of solitude, had become a place of transformation. And for the first time in years, Lucas realized that his life was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. Hidden truth behind the miracle. Lucas sat down on a hay bale, his mind a storm of confusion and disbelief. The barn had always been a place of solace for him, a place where the weight of the world could be temporarily forgotten as he tended to the animals, the fields, and the solitude that had defined his life for the past 5 years. But now, it felt as though everything he had ever known was shifting beneath him. Clara, the mysterious woman with the human baby, sat beside him, her body still trembling, as if the reality of the situation hadn't quite sunk in for her either. Luna, her loyal dog, lay close to the newborn baby, who was now quietly sleeping between the puppies. It was an image so surreal, so unnatural, that it seemed almost impossible to comprehend. And yet, it was all happening right in front of him. I don't know how this happened," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the baby in front of her. "All I know is that they, whoever they are, did something to me. They made me part of an experiment, but I didn't ask for this. I didn't choose to be part of it." Lucas glanced at her, his brows furrowed. He had so many questions, but they all seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. What experiment? Who are they? But as he looked at Clara, he realized that she wasn't just a victim. She was also carrying the burden of something far darker than either of them could imagine. Clara continued, her voice cracking as she spoke. They told me it was supposed to be a test, some kind of study to understand human biology, to experiment with genetic modifications. They thought I would be the perfect candidate, but what they didn't tell me was that it wasn't just me they were experimenting on. It was my body, my biology, my very ability to conceive and give birth. Lucas leaned forward, his heart heavy with a sense of dread. "So, you're saying, they used you to create that baby?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Clara nodded, her face pale and stricken with guilt. "Yes, that baby was never supposed to be born, but something went wrong. I don't know what happened, but they wanted me to have the baby, to keep it. They were using me as an incubator, Lucas. I never had a choice in any of it." Her voice broke, and she wiped a tear away from her cheek. "I ran. I couldn't stay. I couldn't be a part of whatever they had planned for me anymore. But when I gave birth here, to the baby and Luna's puppies, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back. I couldn't tell anyone because I was afraid. I'm afraid." Lucas's heart ached for her. He had no idea how she felt, how terrifying it must have been to be caught up in something like that. The secrecy, the manipulation, the loss of control over her own body. But there was something more to this. The baby. What was the significance of the child? Was it just a product of twisted science, or was there something more? "Why did you come here?" Lucas asked, his voice gentle, though his mind was still reeling. "Why did you bring the baby to my farm? Why not anywhere else?" Clara looked down at the baby, a soft smile breaking through her tears. "I came here because Luna found me. I don't know how or why, but she came to me when I was on the run. She knew I needed help. I swear she understood. She guided me to this farm, and when I saw the barn, I just knew I had to come here. It felt safe. It felt right." Luna lifted her head, her brown eyes meeting Lucas's. Her tail wagged slowly, as though she knew the answers that they didn't yet have. For a moment, the barn seemed quieter, as if the weight of the situation was beginning to settle. Lucas sat back on the hay bale, his eyes never leaving the baby. He wasn't sure what kind of miracle had brought this child into the world, but he knew one thing for sure. It wasn't just about the dog or the strange experiment. It was about the connection between Luna, Clara, and this child. There was something deeply profound in that connection, something he couldn't quite put into words, but he could feel it in his bones. It was as if this little family, however unorthodox it may have seemed, had been brought together for a reason. And no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to be part of it. But that feeling came with its own set of worries. The world they lived in wasn't a forgiving place, especially when it came to things that defied explanation. What would happen if others found out about Clara, Luna, and the baby? The town was already full of rumors about him, about the strange man who lived on the farm and didn't interact with anyone. Now, with the mysterious birth of a child under such strange circumstances, how would they ever keep this secret? How would they survive the inevitable questions, the inevitable judgment? Clara must have sensed his anxiety because she spoke up again, her voice steady, but still tinged with fear. "You must be wondering what happens next. What will you do? I don't have an answer to that. But I know we can't stay here forever. If they find me, if they find us, I don't know what they'll do. I'm afraid of what they might do to this baby." Lucas clenched his jaw. He could feel the weight of her words pressing on him. He didn't know what was coming, but he knew that whatever it was, they weren't ready. They couldn't hide forever. Something had to be done. The barn was eerily quiet again, save for Luna's soft breathing and the gentle rustling of hay. Lucas's eyes scanned the room, trying to make sense of everything. The barn, the baby, the woman. It all seemed impossible, yet there they were. As Lucas looked at Clara, a sense of determination started to take root in his chest. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but one thing was clear. He would protect this family. He wouldn't let anyone take them from him. He wasn't sure how, but he would find a way. "We'll figure it out," Lucas said finally, his voice calm but firm. "You're not alone, Clara. We'll keep this farm safe. We'll keep you and the baby safe. I don't know what happened here, but I do know this. We don't run. Not anymore." Clara's eyes softened as she looked at him. For the first time since she'd entered the barn, there was a hint of peace in her expression. She was no longer alone. Neither of them were. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon outside, casting a warm golden light into the barn, Lucas realized that this strange, inexplicable situation had changed everything for him. The emptiness that had consumed him for years was starting to fade. He wasn't just living in the past anymore. He was looking forward to a future that had suddenly become very uncertain, but very real. For the first time in years, Lucas felt like he had a purpose again. And that was a miracle in itself. A new beginning. Days turned into weeks, and the strange, improbable family continued to live in the barn. Lucas's life had shifted in ways he couldn't have predicted, and though the questions about the baby, Clara, and Luna never stopped swirling in his mind, they were no longer the focus of his life. He had made a choice to protect them, and now he had to face whatever challenges might come with that decision. The town remained largely unaware of what had transpired in the small barn on the outskirts. Grace, the woman who worked on the farm, noticed the changes in Lucas, but she said little. Perhaps she saw something in him she hadn't seen before, or maybe she had been quietly accepting the changes that had taken root in the barn. She made no mention of the baby or Clara's presence, and for the first time, Lucas found himself grateful for her discretion. But it was hard to ignore the weight of the outside world. As much as Lucas had tried to push his past away, to bury the pain of Olivia's death and everything that had followed, he knew that life, in some way, had to go on. The rumors of the mysterious child began to spread like wildfire. Whispers turned into stories, and the strange happenings at the farm were slowly becoming the subject of hushed conversations between the few townsfolk who still bothered to notice him. Then one night, something changed. Lucas had just finished a long day of work, tending to the animals and doing the usual rounds. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky painted with shades of purple and orange. He was in the barn again, sitting beside Luna as she nursed her puppies, the baby once again resting near her. Clara was inside the house, resting after a long day spent learning about the farm. The baby, though still so small, had started to grow stronger. It was almost impossible to believe that a child born under such miraculous, unnatural circumstances could thrive, but the baby was alive. And for that, Lucas was grateful. Every time he looked at the infant, he saw something that wasn't just extraordinary, it was pure. It was a reminder that life could be unpredictable, but it also had the capacity for greatness, no matter the origin. Suddenly, a knock on the barn door broke the stillness of the night. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the last thing he wanted was for someone to learn about what had been happening on his farm. He stood up, his hand instinctively reaching for the shotgun that still hung by the door. But before he could act, the door creaked open, revealing a figure in the dim light. It was Grace. Her expression was calm, yet there was something urgent in her eyes. "Lucas," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the words she hadn't yet spoken. "There's someone at the edge of your property. They're asking questions. I don't know who they are, but they seem to be looking for something." Lucas's heart sank. He knew exactly what something they were looking for. His mind raced, trying to figure out what to do. The outside world was closing in on him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before someone connected the dots and came to search for Clara, Luna, and the baby. He turned to look at the barn, at the quiet scene unfolding within. Luna, the puppies, the baby, and Clara. In that moment, Lucas realized that he couldn't run anymore. He couldn't hide behind the walls of his farm, waiting for something to happen. He had a responsibility now. A responsibility to Clara, to the child, and to the animals who had all shown him something about the value of life. "Stay inside," Lucas said firmly to Grace, his voice low but resolute. "Lock the door behind you. I'll take care of this." He turned and quickly walked toward the back of the barn, grabbing a flashlight. His boots crunched on the gravel path as he made his way toward the fence. The night air was cool against his skin, the faint smell of damp earth mixing with the scent of hay. There, at the far end of the property, he saw the figure that Grace had mentioned. A man, tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in dark clothes, standing under the flickering light of the old street lamp that barely illuminated the road. He was looking around, as if trying to piece something together. Lucas knew he had no choice but to approach him. He stepped out of the shadows and into the light, his face hardening as he stared at the stranger. "Can I help you?" The man turned to face him, his eyes scanning Lucas with a hint of curiosity. "I'm looking for something," he said slowly. "Someone, a woman and a child. From what I understand, I heard there was something unusual happening here." Lucas's heart raced as the words rang in his ears. They know. His instincts told him to run, to hide, to protect everything that had become his life in the past few weeks, but something else told him to stand firm. "There's no one here you're looking for," Lucas replied with authority, his tone colder than he intended. He stepped forward, blocking the man's path. "I don't know what you've heard, but you're mistaken. Now, I suggest you leave before things get out of hand." The man's expression shifted slightly, as though weighing his options. He didn't seem like someone who was easily deterred. "I don't think you understand," the man said, his voice lower now. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here because I know what happened. I know what you've been hiding." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "You don't know anything. You need to leave." For a moment, there was silence. The man didn't move, but his eyes never left Lucas. And then, as if deciding the confrontation wasn't worth the fight, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Lucas stood there for a long time, his heart still racing, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time someone would come looking, but for the first time since everything had begun, he wasn't afraid. He walked back to the barn, his mind filled with a new sense of purpose. No matter what happened, no matter who came looking for them, Lucas had something to fight for now. He had a family. A strange family, to be sure, but a family nonetheless. As he entered the barn, he saw Clara sitting next to the baby, her eyes tired but filled with peace. Luna rested nearby, her puppies all curled up, still nursing. It was a moment of calm amidst the storm that Lucas knew would eventually come. But for now, they were safe. They were together. And that was all that mattered. "Everything's going to be all right," Lucas whispered, his voice steady. He wasn't sure how he knew it, but in his heart, he knew it was true. "We'll make sure of it." And with that, as the barn settled into the peaceful sounds of the night, Lucas finally allowed himself to believe that miracles, no matter how impossible, could change everything. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.